This is the Gospel Coalition, and they got some weird ideas about medical debt relief. Hi, this is Church is Lame. We're going to talk about how this breaks the church and what we can do to fix it.
Well, Mark, I think if we're going to be honest, the Gospel Coalition has weird ideas about a great many things.
I'd go so far as to say everything they have an idea about is weird. Every once in a while, though, I see an article from them, and I'm like, well, yeah. But
Yeah, right.
This was not one of them.
Every now and then you find a normal, but not too often.
Yeah, because on this one, like they're getting kind of uppity about like medical debt relief, and not like I'm not like uppity like they're complaining about it, but like it's a weird kind of a mixed bag. Basically, like they're trying to alert churches to like possible issues. If you're going to engage in a program of like paying off like somebody's medical debt, okay, and this isn't like, like somebody has a bill with a hospital. Like this is paying off a collection agency.
Got it.
Like that's, what it's doing. So they're paying, whatever they're paying, like, pennies on the dollar from the original debt.
Right.
And
yeah, which is fairly unusual. Like I know most churches have some sort of, I guess the old word we would use is benevolence. Right. Mm-hmm. They have some money set aside. So if somebody walks in and says, hey, we're just having some tough times, and if there's anything you could do to help us with food or with gas or something, that would be great. And almost every church I've ever been to has some sort of pot of money just for that. Right. Yeah. But it's becoming less and less common to see churches foot the bill for big ticket items. Mm-hmm. Now that seems to be more of the realm of a person's social network kind of going, hey, we put up a GoFundMe, and anybody who, if you like this person or you want to help them get better, help us by putting some money in that GoFundMe account. Yeah. And of course, like, the Gospel Coalition can't just be like that straightforward about it. Yeah. And like they're the second, like they have like 4 points that they're like, yeah, you have to keep in mind these things if you're going to do this. And point number 2 is that like, and I quote, like most of the damage has already been done financially. And they're talking not to the person who owes the medical debt. They are talking about to the person like the care provider. So like you go to a hospital and you can't pay them, and then they sell off the debt to a debt collection agency. Yeah. And they're like, well, most of the damage has been done. And I'm like, I take a severe issue with calling it damage. To the multi-billion-dollar healthcare industry? Yeah. Yeah, I went to the emergency room at my giant for-profit hospital, and oh gee, I can't afford to pay it because they're charging me double what they're charging Blue Cross Blue Shield to cover the same expenses, Yeah. And it's like that kind of thing. Like there's just no awareness in this entire article about like the various problems that plague the healthcare industry and why it is somebody might find themselves with a whole bunch of debt. And of course, the biggest reasons is they're uninsured or they are insured, but it was like a catastrophic event. It's crappy insurance. Yeah, it can be like what we would call like, basically catastrophe insurance, or like only covers like if you get brain cancer, and even it barely covers that. With my mother, she had cancer, and there was a lot of medical debt after that, even though my parents had health insurance, and it's just like this complete lack of awareness. Like their first thing is to say, oh, well, there's just this financial problem that comes up with it. It's like, no, the problem is that people don't have all the health coverage that they need. Yeah. It's not like, oh, that like the person who provided the coverage is all of a sudden now they're out money. It's like, that kind of really angered me. Like as a Christian, like we should be saying, well, what's the problem in the first place? And that's the thing we need to be decrying, not like, oh, well, the damage is done. Yeah. And that it's really upsetting to hear that the focus of the damage is on the hospitals or the healthcare industry itself. The healthcare industry in 2021, revenues totaled $4.3 trillion. There is no shortage of money flowing around, making sure that nobody in the healthcare industry is losing their shirt financially. Right. And unbelievable. And I'm like absolutely sure some of the people that have they have this medical debt
have the medical debt because they had like one of those Christian medical cost sharing programs that bailed out on them.
Yeah.
It's like, those things are just the worst.
Oh yeah. We talked about that too. We had an episode about that.
Yeah.
Like, I have no doubt that when those programs were conceived, that they were very well intentioned, right? But the minute you start involving ginormous sums of money, like, there's no getting away from, like, you start having these conversations that have nothing to do with quality healthcare. You start having conversations about how to maximize efficiency and how to minimize costs and how to spread the burden. And the conversation becomes anything but how do we heal people from their sicknesses, you know?
Yeah. And that's just like terrible, like when people are in need, people are in need. Like,
right.
We should be advocating for them to get like taken care of.
Yeah.
One, like this Gospel Coalition article, it even complains at some point that like, well, some of the people that have this medical debt may not actually really be poor. It's like, it's like, well, my dad wasn't poor until he had medical debt.
Right.
So suck it.
Yeah.
It's like they're not poor enough. Like, oh, people need help. We're going to means test them for our Christian love. It's just icky.
Yeah. It just came to my mind that we used to actually have a program that was better than Christian health sharing. And you know what that was? That was Christians actually came together and built flippin' hospitals.
Yeah.
You look at these hospitals like St. Luke's Catholic Hospital, the Franciscan Hospital. These weren't built by multi-million-dollar corporations. They were built by people who believed that the message of the gospel was healing, and they wanted to put their money and their actions where their message was. But the church has gotten out of that business, and now that necessitates things like, these sham Christian healthcare kind of cost-sharing burden scams. Ugh.
Yeah. And I think that like really points to like, how it is this breaking the church is that, the church is supposed to have a response. Like, we're supposed to love people. We're supposed to care for our neighbor. Like whether that's in or out of the church, it's like, Jesus doesn't really specify that. So we're just going to go and say neighbor is anybody.
Yeah.
But it's like, like if Christians used to make hospitals, like all of a sudden now it's like, we have to talk about the dangers of paying off a debt collector so somebody stops getting harassed.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, why don't we like do something to help these people get the coverage that they need in the first place?
Exactly right. When we look at the example of Jesus all throughout the New Testament, I feel like if you, without over spiritualizing it, and and kind of going into the metaphysical with the miracles, generally speaking, when you take a group of people and you multiply bread or multiply fish, you are meeting people's dietary needs. You're making their lives better. When you are healing people of their afflictions, you are making their lives better. When you stop a group of men from stoning you, you are making people's lives better, right? And so there's a real, to me, there's a real sense of, walking this faith has to result in people's lives getting better. And to kind of to stand back and to say, as long as I'm not making people's lives worse, then my faith is between me and Jesus is a load of crap to me,
Yeah, and it's funny you said that because I was just thinking a podcast I was listening to earlier today was making a complaint about just the high degree of individualization that we have in the church. It's like we have a very individualistic culture, but that's not the culture of Jesus. Whether we like it or not. And like people want to make it about like, well, what am I doing individually as a Christian to help do these things? And it's like, no, what are we doing as the church?
Right.
I mean, you want to say like breaking the church. If we stop seeing ourselves as the church and just see ourselves as individual Christians within the church, like we're missing like how the entirety of the Bible talks about us living out our faith. And to me, that kind of comes into, like what we can do to fix it is that we as the church, we can start throwing a weight around. Like, I mean, I don't want to make it a political issue, but, you know, getting like universal health care, for instance, is something that we can, as the church, put our weight behind and support. So we don't have, you know, people going bankrupt because they had the audacity to have an imperfect body and get sick.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you mentioned this, because I was thinking about something yesterday, actually, kind of an unrelated thing, but it's now kind of related to this. Let's say I say something to you like, "Oh, Mark, that noise is really loud." That only has meaning if you understand what quiet or softness is, right?
Right.
If you say something like, "Oh my gosh, that car must have been audaciously expensive." Like, that only has meaning if you have some concept of what it is to be without money. You know, if your life, if you've always had money, then spending more money is nothing, right? It has no meaning.
Right.
Yeah, and so like we talk about individualism now because in God blessed America, it's all about the individual rights, individual freedoms, and it's like literally because, and how many generations has it been since we've had a sense of community, or like what I think of day in and day out is a sense of citizenship. Like, I'm a citizen with the people in my block, in the people with my neighborhood, my city, my county, my country. You know, we are a citizen working towards being a more perfect union, right?
Yeah.
And so, of course, if we're not even going to practice that citizenship in our church, of course we're not going to be able to practice it on an even larger scale.
Yeah, and like it shouldn't be that big of a deal, but like we as a church, like when we look at, I was going to try to look it up real quick, but you know, when we look at the second chapter of Acts, you know, where it talks about everybody like holding everything in common, and you know, and things were distributed to people as they had need. You know, until we have all the healthcare for all the people all the time, you know, it's like I feel like that's where we can go.
Yeah,
is that, you know, we can like kind of look to the Bible, funny enough, as like how do we handle this stuff? It's like we take it seriously. So within our own communities, at the very least, you know, our congregations, when I say community there, it's like we can do that. And Paul had even said something along the lines of, you know, like something that befalls one of us befalls all of us.
Right.
And I wish I could remember where that was so I could actually quote the chapter and verse. But it's like, yeah, like that's the mentality that we as believers should have. And that's part of what should like show that like our way of doing things is superior to the world's way of doing things.
Yeah.
Instead of the Gospel Coalition, who's just, you know, jumping in, you know, face first into just how to be a horrible person of the world.
My what is it like? My cynical think piece has made the world a better place. It's like, that's not how it works. You know, that's just not how any of this works. Like, Jesus didn't go around writing cynical think pieces on tablets. You know, he went around making people's lives better. No. And I think that your final point in our notes is really kind of quite eloquently, you know, kind of sums it up. And this is your point, not mine. You know, at the end of the day, we just actually need to help people and care for them. That's what we have to do. That's what the message of Jesus to his followers are. When he says, "Follow me," he's talking not just about like oh, self-enlightenment and like maybe I'll know more about the Bible today than I did yesterday. He's not just talking about education and being more satisfied with your complexion and your socioeconomic status. He's talking about doing the work of bringing the kingdom here, you know?
Yeah, like hence my disgust with like that, you know, the article complaining about, well, people might not really be poor.
Yeah.
Like, like, because that was Jesus's concern.
Yeah. Like, what does that even mean? Like, what does it say about the richest country in the world that people who aren't poor still go into debilitating debt over healthcare?
It says a lot. It says a lot.
In the context of a global community where most of the modern nations have figured out how to care for everybody and not bankrupt themselves in the process.
Hey, you know, if I had those answers, man, I would be, you know, a lot more important than I presently am.
I hear that. Well, here's the deal. we're Churches Lame. Mark and I, we love the church. We want to see it grow. We want to see it flourish here in America. But there's no doubt that Christian leaders and thought leaders like the Gospel Coalition just paint a picture of a group of faith people who are nutty bananas sometimes. And so we get here and talk about it so that the next time some thought leader goes, why doesn't anybody take the church seriously? Well, watch our podcast or listen to our podcast, and we'll tell you why the church is not taken seriously. So if you've got something to add to this conversation, by all means, get on the keyboard and start typing furiously about how Mark and I are as wrong can be, and we will read it. And, if it's thoughtful enough, we'll respond to it. If you're listening to this on the podcast, by all means, send us an email to churcheslamepodcast@gmail.com and click all those likes and subscribes and downloads and notifies and ring the bells and all that stuff. Click, 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 click.
And with that, go in peace and serve the Lord. Amen.
Hey, if you got something out of this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you would consider clicking that thanks button or supporting us on Patreon or buy us a coffee or one of those things. And if you want to see more content just like this, would you click on this playlist called Financial Failure?